the time this happened, I was 10 years old, going to a school in Osaka, Japan. I lived in America, but every summer my mom would take my younger sisters and I to Japan to see her mother and make us go to school since Japanese schools go on until late July before their summer break. In the mornings, I would walk to school with my sisters, and everything was usually okay. Although we'd get the occasional odd stare, since despite still being half Japanese, in a small town like that, where no tourists ever came, we stuck out like a sore thumb. However, once school was over, I usually was unable to walk home with my sisters because of after-school clubs and the clubs ending at different times. At least I had a few friends who could walk me home, however, and give me some company, so I rarely ever was alone. One day, I decided I didn't want to stay for my club and that I just wanted to go home early and play some Wii. I knew my mom wouldn't mind since I had decided to join the cooking club, which wasn't very important. My friends, however, had more obligations than I did, since they actually lived in Japan and went to the school year-round, unlike me, and could not accompany me home. My walk home started out fine, but rather quickly my 10-year-old self felt something was off. There was a man with a baseball cap, wearing one of those cold masks, which isn't honestly that uncommon in Japan, with baggy clothing following me. He was still a fair distance away from me too, so since I was a pretty naive kid, I shrugged it off and kept walking. But pretty soon, after I heard footsteps pretty close behind me now, I figured it was a different person. But being curious, I turned my head to see the same man, closing the distance between us fairly quickly. I remember starting to feel pretty nervous at that point. A quick point here before I continue. In the town I was at, there's lots of small alleys and streets that are all connected, so you can take plenty of wrong turns and still end up home as long as you have a decent idea as to where your house is. My brain doesn't function well at all when I'm nervous or stressed, so instinctively, I turned into a small alleyway, which was honestly the most dumb thing I could have done. But at the time, I figured that the man would keep walking and that would resolve all of this. But instead, he turned into the alleyway as well. At this point, I started fast walking. I didn't want to straight up run since I still wasn't 100% sure he was following me, and running would come off as kind of rude if the man wasn't following me. I began making random turns into streets and narrow alleys that I had never stepped foot into before, hoping that the man wouldn't follow me. Surely he was just an innocent man trying to get somewhere. However, even my dumb 10-year-old brain knew that after the 5th or 6th time I had made a random turn, with the man still following me, that I was in danger. At the time, I was in a narrow alleyway with walls that were way taller than I was, so I couldn't see what was up ahead or next to me. I decided I should start running, not thinking that a grown man would be faster than me. Again, I was a dumb kid. Also, I was weighed down by my backpack and water bottle, so I can only imagine how slow I was. I could hear his footsteps much louder against the asphalt, and I was scared shitless. I was sure I was going to get kidnapped and then murdered. I remember running with everything I had, to the point I was afraid I'd literally run myself into the ground. I was way too terrified to even cry or scream. But the alleyway went out into a street I recognized, where there was a supermarket, and thankfully, there were several people there, either walking or on their bicycles. I slowed down immediately. I was a self-conscious kid, and I didn't want to attract more attention to myself than my foreign looks already were. I turned around once more to see the man who was simply standing there for a few moments before walking in the direction of the supermarket. But I knew that wasn't his final destination. I had taken the weirdest route, and there were much easier ways that he could have used if he wanted to go to the supermarket. I remember telling my mom, who then contacted my school. I got in a little bit of trouble for deciding to go home alone that day, and afterwards, a teacher always made sure there was at least one kid with me when I went home. This happened when I was 18 and had just moved to Tokyo for college, and was living at a dorm that was unfortunately about an hour away from my school and the center of Tokyo. Now, Japan is one of the safest countries in the world. People leave their bikes unlocked for hours on the street in the middle of the city, and nobody will lay a hand on them. The only real crime problem they have is pervs on the subway with wandering hands. But since I'm very obviously American and won't put up with that bullshit, I guess no guy has ever been brave enough to try anything on me. That was until one night when I ended up going out to dinner with a friend and had to take the late train back to my dorm. If you've ever been on the Japanese subway, you'll know how crowded the express trains can get at night and early in the morning. They literally have men standing outside of the train who push passengers in like a bunch of sardines. Well, I was pretty tired and not in the mood to stand for an hour between a bunch of sweaty drunk businessmen, so I opted to take the local train back to my dorm, even though it would take about 15 minutes longer than the express. So, I'm sitting on the train and nothing is out of the ordinary. As the train goes along, more and more people start getting off the train until it's only me and one other man in our car. He's just your typical middle-aged Japanese businessman, a little on the greasy side, and after a few stops, no one else gets on and the man doesn't get off, but I can feel him watching me from the other side of the car. I'm not too worried. I get a lot of stares being a young American girl in the middle of Tokyo, but then the guy starts inching his way across the car closer to where I'm sitting. Still, I think no big deal. Maybe he's trying to get closer to a map on the wall. I can still feel his eyes on me, and just to be safe, I move to the other end of the car. It's more comfortable in the reserve seats anyway. Then it gets weird. The guy gets up and moves to the exact seat I had just been sitting in. I was kind of grossed out. What was he trying to do? Feel my warmth from having just been sitting there? Now I was kind of getting uneasy. Luckily, the train stops at its next stop, and the guy gets off the train. I was relieved, until he comes back on the train through the door right in front of me and sits directly next to me, looking straight at me and open-mouth breathing on me. I didn't make eye contact and just kind of sat frozen for a few seconds till I realized what was going on. I looked at him like, "Oh, don't even try anything on me," and stood to get up. Luckily, someone else got on the train at the same time, and he literally bolted off the train before the door shut, and we left. I don't know what he was planning on doing that he'd risk missing his stopover, but thank God someone else got on the train when they did. Needless to say, I put up with standing for an hour and take the express train now. To start off, I had just finished my junior year in high school, and my Japanese language class was taking a trip to Japan to learn more about the language and culture. A friend of mine, and now girlfriend, who was unable to take Japanese that year, asked to come along and was allowed to by our teacher. The trip was 13 days long and covered a lot of ground in Japan. This friend of mine, who we'll call Sarah for the sake of the story, has a history of horrible headaches and migraines, but neither surfaced during our trip except for one time. We were in Kyoto about to watch a performance of various types of Japanese theater, No, Bunraku, and Kabuki, and showed up a bit early While we were waiting in line to buy our tickets, Sarah started looking a bit distressed, and I asked her what was wrong. One of her headaches was coming on, and I had no clue what to do. I only knew it was going to get horrible, so in an attempt to relieve her pain, I offered to take her to buy some coffee. Caffeine helps headaches. The great thing about Japan is that there are vending machines everywhere, and more times than not, they'll have hot and cold coffee cans in them. So I'm walking her down the main street in the Gion district, looking left and right down alleys for one of these vending machines. After a few minutes, I see one in a shady-looking alley. Whatever, she needs coffee and Japan is pretty safe, right? For the most part, yeah. Looks like we caught an unlucky break. As we get to the vending machine, I start pulling enough yen out of my pocket and have enough for 3 drinks. It was relatively hot, so I ended up buying a Coke for myself and 2 coffees for her. The other just in case it happens again. As she's picking up the cans from the vending area, I notice a man out of the corner of my eye, roughly 25 feet down, get up from the wall he was leaning on and start making his way down towards us. Naturally, I shrug it off and assume he's going in one of the buildings in the alley. I think there are a lot of apartments in there. So we just start walking back to the theater house by means of the alleys because they were much quieter, and Sarah was having a horrible headache by the time we got to the machine. The guy's still following us. No big deal, I'm sure he's got a house up here, I thought. I hadn't looked back for a while, and when I did, the guy was about 10 feet away from us. That's when I was able to get a good look at him before turning away. Black dress shirt, dark blue jeans, kind of a generic but unfriendly face, and his eyes were trained on Sarah. At this point, I've got every shade of red alert going off in my head, but I have absolutely no clue what I would do should I have to intervene. I'm still holding my can of Coke in my hand, and that's about the only weapon I've got besides a knife in my backpack. You can buy a lot of cool shit in Japan. So I started to shake it pretty hard just in case. If nothing ends up happening, I'll leave it alone for a while and drink it later in the night. Should I have to use it, then it'll spray all over the guy's face and give us enough time to hightail it back to the main road where she wouldn't be in any danger. As I'm shaking the can, the guy advances closer and closer and finally puts his hand on our shoulder. I flip the fuck out and point the can at the guy's face and open it in a matter of seconds, expecting it to shoot a stream of steady carbonated danger in the guy's face. Nope. Just kinda shot off in a bit of foam and soda. The guy is stunned briefly, and that gives her enough time to escape his grip, and I don't know what I was thinking, but I just kinda swing the can in front of his face. About half of it empties onto the guy's face with open eyes. As he's doubling over in pain, which probably didn't last long, we hauled ass back to the main street and hurried back to the theater. I have no clue what that guy's intentions were, but I'm just glad I was able to keep her out of danger. This happened to me about a month ago, but it still kinda boggles me. I live in Tokyo and commute via those famously crazy crowded trains daily. There exists on them this kind of unspoken agreement that everyone works together to make this suck as little as possible. People for the most part hold their backpacks in front of them, men don't manspread, etc. But that's when the trains are full. About 2 stops before mine, the train goes from sardine can to everyone on this train could lay on the seats and have room left over. So usually I can sit down at this point. I'm not a Japanese woman, very obviously so, even when I'm in my white dress shirt and pencil skirt like all the other office drones. I'm often the only obviously non-Japanese woman on my train in the morning, but despite my appearance, I'm fluent in Japanese. So one day, I sit down when the train empties out, headphones in, mobile game going, ready to enjoy the 10 minutes of sitting I get on my hour commute. I'm sitting with my legs crossed, but there's maybe 10 people in the whole car, so I'm not in anyone's way. I'm tuned out when all of a sudden, a hand reaches out and grabs my bare knee. I'm in a skirt. I, of course, jolt straight out of my skin, rip out my headphones, and look up at the hand's owner. Some skinny old Japanese dude in his 60s? Points at my legs, then at other people on the train. Again, a max of 10 in a car that can hold 50 plus easily, and probably held about 80 10 minutes ago. In slightly broken English, he says,
"You must not cross legs."
I'm so bewildered by this that I start to tell him in Japanese, "The train isn't crowded right now. I'm not in anyone's way." But he doesn't like this answer. He starts to reach for my legs again, presumably to uncross my legs himself. I, liking even less of this, summon up my loudest non-scream, "Don't touch me!" And thankfully this is enough to get him to stop that, as another thing you don't do on trains here is make a fuss. Sadly though, yet another thing you don't do here is get involved. So despite a woman all but screaming, "Don't touch me!" it's some foreign woman causing trouble, best not to get involved, so no one comes over. So while I've made it clear that I will not stand for physical confrontation, this old dude still feels comfortable enough to stand directly in front of me, nearly knee to knee, looming over me while he repeats endlessly,
"You must."
He did this for at least 5 minutes. I didn't move. I didn't blink or break eye contact. I started plans B through P of how to get off this train at the next stop. Thankfully, he gave up before the next stop, shaking his head and calling me a rude bitch in Japanese before wandering off. Still take the same train, but haven't seen him since. Let's not meet again, leg police fucker, lest you find out what happens when you loom over a girl at dick punting height.